Have you ever wondered what it truly felt like to rely on something you could not see, something that whispered warnings long before danger appeared? For the earliest hunters roaming the harsh world of 1.4 million years ago, survival depended on more than strength, speed, or sharpened stone tools. It depended on a strange and powerful calling, an invisible voice that seemed to rise from the depths of the earth or fall from the sky, guiding them in moments when extinction was just one wrong step away. This was not superstition for them. It was a force woven into their daily existence, something they sensed in their bones, something that tightened their breath when danger approached. As these ancestral hunters stepped onto vast plains filled with predators larger and faster than themselves, every choice carried weight. A shift in the wind, the sudden silence of birds, the low tremble of the ground, even the metallic taste in the air could signal a hidden threat. They did not describe these sensations with words the way we do today. Instead, they felt them like a pulse, like an ancient memory awakening at the perfect moment. Many believed this guidance came from an unseen realm, a divine message protecting them from stepping into the jaws of extinction day after day. This instinctive connection to the environment shaped every movement. Their eyes scanned patterns long before they consciously understood them. Their bodies reacted before their minds formed explanations. That flicker of intuition, that shiver of warning, became the difference between leading their group back home with food or disappearing forever into the grasslands. And the more they trusted these silent messages, the stronger the bond became, weaving human survival with something that felt greater, older, and deeply spiritual. Even now, when we look back across millennia, it is impossible not to wonder how much of that ancient awareness still lives inside us. How much of what they called a divine calling was actually a refined instinct we no longer use? How many times in our own lives have we felt something similar without knowing why it mattered? And if those early hunters had ignored these signals, how different would our story be? Before we continue exploring how this mysterious guidance shaped their daily lives, tell me something. Have you ever felt a sudden intuition you could not explain? Share your experience in the comments, leave a like if this topic resonates with you, and make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss the next part of this journey. From here, everything becomes even more intriguing as we move deeper into the world of these ancestral hunters and the silent forces that walked beside them. As the hunters moved across the open landscapes, the world around them became a vast library of signs, each subtle detail whispering clues about survival. What we might dismiss today as insignificant background noise was, for them, a complex language spoken by the earth itself. A broken twig could reveal the direction of a predator's movement. The sudden absence of insects could hint at a lurking shadow waiting just beyond sight. Even the density of the air, heavy or trembling, could announce an approaching threat long before it materialized. These signals were not random. Generations had learned to sense patterns that repeated over centuries, transforming instinct into something almost prophetic. In this early stage of human history, the environment did not simply surround them, it interacted with them. Hunters sensed when the ground felt too calm or when the wind carried a sharpness that did not belong. Their bodies registered these shifts instantly, long before thought interfered. It was as if their skin, their breath, their heartbeat had become tools as essential as any sharpened stone. Each sign they perceived layered over another, forming a silent map of danger and opportunity. While modern humans often move distractedly through life, unaware of the signals that pulse around us, these early humans lived in a state of constant awareness. Every moment demanded presence, clarity, and the ability to interpret meaning hidden in the smallest details. Sometimes those signs came in combinations so precise that hunters felt a tightening in their chest before understanding why. A certain angle of bird flight, a faint vibration underfoot, a shift in the smell of the grass, all merging into a sensation that something was wrong. They trusted these warnings even when they could not explain them, because survival depended on responding quickly, without doubt or hesitation. This was not fear, but discipline, a skill perfected through countless life and death encounters passed down from one generation to the next. The youngest members of the group learned by watching the elders pause, look over their shoulder, or change direction based on signals only they understood. Over time, these apprentices began to recognize the same patterns, feeling the same subtle alerts rising within themselves. It was through this slow and attentive learning that each generation refined its ability to read the world. And as these hunters journeyed deeper into territories filled with unknown dangers, the environment continued to speak to them, offering warnings and insights that shaped every step they took. Even in moments when everything seemed still, the hunters knew that stillness was never truly empty. It was a moment filled with hidden meaning, a pause that could transform into threat or safety depending on what came next. And as they advanced through the plains, carrying the weight of responsibility for their group, those small signs continued to whisper, preparing them for encounters that would test not only their instincts, but their understanding of a world far more complex than it appeared on the surface. There were moments when the air itself seemed to shift, as if carrying a message only the most attuned could receive. Hunters didn't always understand what triggered their sudden unease, a tightening of the chest, a prickling at the base of the neck, a sensation that something was watching. These were not feelings to be ignored. These were the quiet alarms passed down by nature itself, and only those who respected them lived long enough to teach the next generation. The early human mind, though primitive in structure compared to our own, was highly sensitive to rhythm, vibration, movement, and contrast. Every crackle in the grass, every flicker of movement at the periphery, every moment of unnatural stillness triggered an alert system that evolved not through logic, but through survival. This form of sensing wasn't entirely conscious. It was a dance between instinct and environment, a non-verbal conversation between the human body and the world around it. Even in situations where no immediate threat could be identified, hunters trusted this deep ancestral feeling. If something felt wrong, they moved. If a path that seemed safe hours earlier suddenly felt heavy, they turned back. This wasn't fear. It was reverence for the subtle intelligence that had kept their bloodlines alive through ages of uncertainty. And sometimes the signs came not from the physical world, but from within. The intuition of a seasoned hunter often surpassed the logic of the group. A decision made in silence, without debate, without proof, could mean the difference between ambush and escape. These inner sensations became sharpened through repetition. The more they listened to their instincts, the more accurate those instincts became. Eventually, many of these early humans stopped distinguishing between the self and the signals. The message was them. They had become the medium through which ancestral wisdom operated. This level of awareness created an invisible hierarchy among the group. The ones who consistently sensed danger before others were respected, followed, sometimes even feared. Their silence was seen as wisdom, their hesitations as insight. Children watched them not for what they said, but for what they noticed without speaking. A glance toward the horizon, a pause in the step, a furrowed brow. These were the gestures that warned of a lion nearby or a trap hidden in the terrain. In time, what we call instinct became their most powerful tool, surpassing weapons and strategies. It was cultivated like a sixth sense, honed through blood, memory, and spiritual alignment with the land. This was not a superstition. It was a survival system, born of brutal necessity and refined through generations of trial and error. And it became clear that those who ignored it, those who thought they knew better than the signals, were the ones who didn't return. Yet for all their understanding, even the wisest among them admitted there were moments they couldn't explain. Times when the body screamed without reason, when their dreams pointed toward danger, when an invisible force tugged them away from death. What exactly was this force? Where did it come from? How did it know what they couldn't? The act of hunting was never a simple matter of pursuit and capture. It was an emotional and spiritual threshold that early humans crossed with each expedition. They didn't just walk into the wilderness with confidence. They entered with reverence, often in silence, sensing that the outcome depended on more than muscle or planning. There were moments, just before the chase began, when something would pass through the group like an invisible wave, a shared tension, a shift in breathing, a pull in the chest. No one spoke of it out loud, but they all felt it. Something was either right or very wrong. It was during these brief windows of anticipation that many claimed to feel something outside themselves. Not a thought, not an emotion, but a presence, a message. They might pause at the edge of a clearing, eyes scanning the tall grass, only to change course for no visible reason. Often, that change would later reveal itself as the very decision that spared their lives. This wasn't just reflex. It was the deep-rooted belief that something beyond human understanding walked with them, whispered through the wind, or moved silently through the trees. They called it many things, a guardian, a voice, a spirit. But what mattered was that it worked. When the hunt began, their senses were already heightened, but this inner sensation would sometimes override even their sharpest instincts. If a hunter suddenly stopped, the others followed. If one turned back, the group respected it. There was no questioning what had been felt, because by now, they had all experienced the unexplained. Times when an invisible force seemed to intervene. When a predator that should have attacked simply walked away. When an easy kill turned into a deadly trap, avoided at the last second due to a feeling. In these moments, the hunt became more than survival. It became communion with something sacred. Not every group experienced this equally. Some seemed more attuned, more protected. Their stories told of ancestral voices guiding their steps, of unseen watchers in the shadows. And as these hunters returned to camp, successful or not, they carried more than meat. They carried the memory of that encounter, the echo of something they couldn't name but knew they would trust again. This connection didn't need explanation because it had proven itself through generations. It was there in the way they moved, in the way they observed the world, in the reverence with which they approached life and death. And whether it came from a divine presence or a sharpened instinct, the result was the same. Those who listened lived. Among the many abilities that kept early humans alive, one stood out not for its visibility, but for its absence: silence. While modern minds often associate silence with calm, for these ancient people, it could be the loudest signal of all. A sudden hush from the canopy above, the disappearance of chirping insects, the wind stalling without warning. These were not peaceful moments. They were alerts. In many cases, silence preceded catastrophe. It meant a predator had entered the area. It meant something had shifted, and that the natural world itself had taken notice. These hunters knew the patterns of sound so intimately that they recognized even the smallest deviations. Their ears had adapted to hear not just what was present, but what was missing. A single bird call could indicate a safe path forward, while its absence could mean an ambush. This level of acoustic sensitivity shaped how they moved, how they paused, and when they made decisions. In a time when spoken language was still primitive or developing, Nature's voice was clearer than any words they could utter. When the sounds vanished, hearts quickened. There was no need for conversation. Each person in the group felt the same message wash over them. Muscles tensed, eyes darted, feet slowed. The absence of noise became its own presence, something to be respected and obeyed. The most seasoned among them could even identify what type of predator was nearby, based solely on which species had fallen silent. They understood that different animals reacted to danger in unique ways, and by learning these patterns, they could build an invisible radar system from the very fabric of the forest or plains. Sometimes a sound would return, but too quickly. The rhythm felt off, unnatural, forced. Then they knew something was wrong. Predators, too, learned to mimic the environment to fool their prey, and early humans had to stay one step ahead. They didn't only listen with their ears, they listened with their bodies. Vibrations in the soil, pressure shifts in the air, even how their breath echoed off nearby rocks gave them cues to interpret. These subtle distinctions were passed down through lived experience. A father teaching his child to stop not just when it's quiet, but when it's too quiet. A mother showing her daughter how to hold still until the chorus of insects returned naturally. These teachings weren't written or spoken. They were embodied, practiced, internalized. Over generations, this turned them into masters of environmental perception. Their survival depended on hearing the world not just as sound, but as signal. And through this sensitivity, they formed a kind of partnership with the natural realm, an agreement built on awareness, respect, and the shared rhythm of life and death. Not all messages came from the ground or the trees or the animals that shared the land. Some came from what they could not see, from what they could only feel. For these early humans, the invisible was not dismissed as fantasy. It was recognized as part of their world, as real and vital as the air they breathed. When the sky shifted in color or a sudden pressure filled their chests without a clear cause, they believed it was more than coincidence. They believed it was communication. And not from other humans, but from something beyond, something higher. They did not have words for gods or spirits or energy as we use them today. But they had stories, shapes drawn on cave walls, gestures passed from one elder to another. Moments of silence during fire rituals that honored what they called the source, or the unseen one. This wasn't religion in the modern sense. It was survival through alignment. When they stood beneath a storm and felt the vibration of thunder in their ribs, they didn't just hear noise, they felt instruction. When lightning struck a tree ahead of their camp, it was not random, it was direction. Their choices shifted accordingly, and they believed that to ignore these signs was to invite danger. These beliefs were not built on fear, but on repeated experience. When they followed a feeling and found safety, it reinforced the idea that something was guiding them. Over time, this guidance became ritualized. Certain members of the I group, often those who experienced the strongest sensations, became listeners, interpreters, mediums between the visible and the invisible. They didn't command power. They received messages. Their role wasn't to control, but to translate. And the rest of the group listened, not out of obligation, but because those messages had saved them before. It's difficult for modern minds, surrounded by noise and insulated from raw nature, to imagine what it felt like to truly sense something divine in every shadow or breeze. But for these early humans, that presence was a constant companion. In the silence of the night, when all sounds fell away, they didn't feel alone. They felt watched, protected, sometimes warned. There were moments when a sudden chill moved through the camp, and all rose at once, knowing without knowing that something had changed. Minutes later, a predator might appear, or a storm might strike. But the message had already arrived. It had simply taken a form we have long since forgotten how to read. As generations passed, this connection to the unseen became part of their identity. It wasn't a skill to learn, it was something you remembered, something already inside you. Children were taught not just how to see or hear, but how to feel what cannot be seen. And those who could feel more deeply were given special roles, not of leadership, but of listening. They were taught to sit in stillness for hours, not for rest, but for reception. Because sometimes the most urgent message comes in complete quiet, carried by nothing but the space between the moments we usually ignore. When night fell, everything changed. The same hunters who moved with power and confidence during the day became more alert, more cautious, more connected to something they couldn't name. The darkness wasn't simply the absence of light. It was the awakening of another world, a world where familiar sounds turned into threats and shadows stretched into unknown shapes. But even more than physical danger, there was a psychological pressure that settled into their minds. Something ancient, something primal. It was in the stillness, in the crackling of distant branches, in the feeling that their small fire barely kept the chaos away. At night, they felt watched, not by animals alone, but by forces they couldn't see, their senses heightened, not by choice, but by necessity. Sleep came in rotations, shallow and fragile, as each person waited their turn to guard the silence. And during these shifts, there were moments when the air felt heavier, as if layered with presence. A presence that didn't make a sound, but made itself known. Some believed it was the ancestors. Others believed it was a spirit world that grew stronger when the sun disappeared. Whatever it was, it changed their behavior, sharpened their instincts, and made them rely even more on those invisible signals that had guided them through the day. Parents clutched their children closer. Even infants, still too young to understand the world, would sometimes wake in silence, eyes wide, staring into the darkness as if sensing the same weight. There was a spiritual urgency during the night. Stories weren't told to entertain, but to protect. Rituals weren't performed for tradition, they were armor. Before sleep, they whispered into the void, not out of superstition, but out of memory. They remembered the nights when the silence broke too late, when danger came before the message was clear. And yet, they didn't avoid the night. They learned from it. They respected it. Some even claimed that their most powerful moments of insight came during those hours, when the veil between the physical and the spiritual world was thinnest. It was in the firelight's flicker, in the direction smoke curled, in the rhythm of an owl's call that they found meaning. Not answers, just signs. Signs that became part of how they made decisions, even when logic failed them. Fear was not weakness, it was awareness. And in the dark, that awareness kept them alive. They did not fight it. They leaned into it, allowed it to reshape their understanding of the world. Because every sound they couldn't explain, every feeling they couldn't trace, could be the warning that saved their children from vanishing by morning. Knowledge in those times was not written, stored, or categorized. It was breathed, remembered, and lived. Each generation of early humans became both the receiver and the guardian of ancestral wisdom, not through books or spoken doctrine, but through experiences encoded in the body. A young child did not sit through lessons. They watched. They listened. They felt. They absorbed the pauses in a parent's movement, the subtle glances exchanged during moments of danger, the quiet respect given to certain places or moments. It was through these patterns, subtle, repetitive, deeply embodied, that they came to understand the messages their ancestors had interpreted long before them. And these weren't simple teachings like how to hunt or build a fire. They were spiritual technologies, techniques for decoding a world filled with signals beyond the visible and audible. A child might be taught to notice how the wind bent a tree line before a storm, or how the behavior of a single bird could warn of an approaching predator. But even more than that, they were taught to trust their inner reaction to those cues. If something inside twisted with tension, if the hairs on their arms rose without reason, it wasn't dismissed as childish fear. It was encouraged, honored, developed. This transmission of intuition, of inherited perception, was considered sacred. Certain gestures, certain calls, even the way ash from the fire settled in the air, all became part of a symbolic language passed from elder to youth. These signs could mean move, wait, hide, or speak. They required no explanation because they resonated at a level deeper than language. And when one generation passed them to the next, they weren't passing instructions. They were passing a connection to the pulse of the land. Even dreams played a role in this wisdom. Children would wake from vivid visions, and the community would not laugh or ignore them. They would ask questions. They would interpret the symbols. They believed the dream world was not separate from reality, but an extension of it, a space where deeper truths could be revealed. These dreams, especially when repeated by multiple members of a group, could influence major decisions. Whether to migrate, whether to hunt in a new region, or whether to avoid a location altogether. In many ways, the survival of early humans hinged not only on reacting to the world, but on interpreting it through a lens refined by thousands of inherited memories. These memories weren't always direct or specific. They were felt as echoes, as impulses. And the closer someone was to those echoes, the more they were valued in the community. That's why, even without written symbols, without maps or records, they remembered. Not with precision, but with meaning. They remembered the feeling before the lion attacked, the taste of the air before the flood came, the silence before the loss. And in remembering, they kept their people alive, generation after generation, guided by messages too old to explain, but too important to forget. Over time, the line between what was real and what was mystical became blurred, not because early humans were confused, but because their experience of the world didn't require separation. What they touched, saw, or heard was never disconnected from what they felt, dreamed, or intuited. For them, reality included the unseen. The whisper of a wind through hollow trees could be just as meaningful as the growl of a predator. A shape in the fire could hold the same weight as a footprint in the mud. They did not question whether a sign was real or imagined. If it moved them to act, it was real enough. The idea of separating logic from intuition hadn't yet been born. Life demanded immediate decisions, and survival didn't wait for explanations. If a message came from a strange coincidence, a shadow in the fog, or the echo of a dream, it was respected. Many modern minds might dismiss this as superstition, but for those early humans, it was simply part of the pattern. A broader logic, one that didn't rely on categories but on experience. There were moments when entire groups would change their path based on nothing more than a sudden sense of dread. No signs, no visible threats, just a feeling. And later, they would discover a collapsed riverbank, or fresh predator tracks, or evidence of a nearby conflict they had unknowingly avoided. These events reinforced the belief that something beyond their senses was guiding them. It wasn't blind faith. It was accumulated proof, season after season, year after year. To understand how deeply this shaped their world, it's important to realize that even their practical tasks were woven with symbolic meaning. Building a shelter wasn't just physical protection. It had to face the right direction, be built during the right moon phase, or begin after a specific animal call. Hunting wasn't only about tracking. It was about timing, presence, and harmony with what they believed was a greater rhythm. If the animals moved differently, if the clouds didn't behave as expected, they paused. Not out of fear, but out of respect for a pattern they could feel but never fully predict. These choices were not made lightly. They came from a lifetime of noticing, a lifetime of being wrong just once and losing someone. Each action carried the weight of memory, not just personal, but ancestral. They lived in a constant state of attention, not as a burden, but as a way of honoring those who had come before. The lines on their faces didn't just come from wind and time, but from the weight of every decision made under invisible pressure. The world was alive in every direction, not metaphorically, literally. The rocks, the sky, the animals, the silence itself. Everything held meaning. And in that dense forest of signs, they navigated with a kind of intelligence we've almost forgotten how to access. It wasn't written, but it was remembered. It wasn't visible, but it was trusted. And even today, in rare moments when instinct overtakes logic, we feel its echo. There were times when the entire group sensed it at once, a moment just before dawn or during a pause in migration, when the air changed. It wasn't cold or warm, loud or silent. It simply shifted. And in that shift, a message arrived. Not with words, but with a sudden weight in the chest, a knot in the stomach, or an overwhelming urge to act. These moments could not be ignored. They were the final calls, the ones that, if misunderstood or dismissed, could lead to devastating loss. Yet when honored, they changed everything. The stories passed down spoke of a day when a group of hunters, confident and prepared, suddenly stopped moving. No one knew why. There was no threat in sight, but the oldest among them felt it. He asked them to wait. Moments later, an unseen predator emerged ahead, an ambush they had narrowly avoided. Other tales told of mothers who refused to settle their families in certain caves, claiming the place was too quiet. Days later, those areas collapsed or flooded. These warnings didn't always come with explanation, but they always came with clarity. The body knew before the mind caught up. This deep inner awareness wasn't framed as divine in the way we understand divinity today. It wasn't about worship or obedience. It was about listening, a profound act of humility in the face of something greater, older, and far more precise than any one person. They understood they were part of a system far beyond themselves, and this system spoke in pulses, in dreams, in sensations. Ignoring it wasn't just dangerous, it was unthinkable. Across generations, the memory of these final messages, the warnings, the gut feelings, the invisible nudges, became embedded in their collective identity. They didn't need to understand where it came from to honor it. They acted because their ancestors had acted. They survived because they remembered. And in remembering, they allowed the line of life to continue through fire, flood, famine, and fear. The divine calling wasn't about hearing voices in the sky. It was about sensing what had always been speaking to them: the ground, the air, the silence, the blood. And perhaps that is the question that remains for us now. If we stopped and listened, truly listened, what would we hear? Would we recognize that ancient whisper still living inside us? Or have we gone too far from the source to know it when it calls again? If you've made it this far, it's because something in this story resonated with you. Maybe you're one of those people who still feels things that can't be explained. If so, write in the comments. That message was for me. Let's see who else felt it too. And if this content connected with something inside you, hit the like button. It helps more than you realize. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's coming next. There's a video right beside this one that deepens this journey even further. Click it and keep walking this path with me.